A young wanderer built a career from chasing danger across the world, turning reckless leaps into best-selling tales. He climbed mountains, swam forbidden waters, flew across continents in an open cockpit, and lived for the thrill of the next impossible feat. But when he set out to cross the Pacific in a handmade junk, his radio went silent in the heart of a storm, leaving only speculation, unanswered questions, and the legacy of a man who pushed adventure past its breaking point. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jolynn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Richard's story. Richard Halliburton was born on January 9th, 1900 to Wesley and Nell Halliburton. He spent his childhood in Memphis, Tennessee with his younger brother, Wesley Jr. He attended the college prep school, Memphis University School, where his favorite subjects were geography and history. He showed promise as a violinist and was a fair golfer and tennis player. He graduated from Lawrenceville School in 1917, and in 1921 he graduated from Princeton University. Richard held several jobs on the editorial staff while he attended school. He was first the chief editor of the Lawrence, and later was on the editorial board of the Daily Princetonian and chief editor of the Princetonian Pictorial Magazine. During the summer of 1919, Richard became an ordinary seaman, which is a member of the deck department of a ship. He boarded the freighter Octorara and set off for England. He traveled around London and Paris, but soon returned to Princeton to resume his studies. Richard originally considered a career as a professor, but he couldn't get his trip to England out of his head. This trip encouraged him to travel more, and he started living by the motto, "Seize the day." He was further encouraged after a magazine paid him for an article. The success of this article encouraged him to choose travel writing as a career. Later, Richard was given bookings for lectures. His talks became popular with audiences as he displayed such enthusiasm when recounting vivid moments of his travels. His popularity continued to grow as he had as many as 50 lectures a month. Richard became inspired by the words of Oscar Wilde, who enjoyed experiencing the moment before it had vanished. Richard found himself rejecting marriage, family, and a regular job. He liked his bachelorhood, youthful adventure, and the thrill of the unknown. His father disapproved of his new outlook on life and advised him to get the wanderlust out of his system and return to Memphis to live a traditional life. Richard didn't take his father's advice, believing that his fortunes lay abroad, not at home. He found himself on many adventures as he climbed the Matterhorn, hung out with the French Foreign Legion, spent a night atop the Great Pyramid, and even got himself incarcerated at Devil's Island. He retraced the path of Odysseus, met pirates and headhunters, and swam the Nile, the Grand Canyon of Venice, and the reflecting pool at the Taj Mahal. He even became the first person to swim the entire length of the Panama Canal. In 1925, Richard published his first major book, titled The Royal Road to Romance. In it, he recounted his travels around the world since graduating from Princeton. The book quickly became a bestseller. Richard liked to characterize himself as a nomad and traveled on as little money as possible. He was especially frugal when it came to railroad tickets, often not buying them, and defying train conductors to do something about it. He later recalled that while passing through India, one particular collector would have pushed him off the train had Richard not pushed him off first. In 1930, Richard hired pioneer aviator Moy Stevens to fly him around the world in an open cockpit biplane named the Flying Carpet. On Christmas Day, 1930, the two embarked on one of the most fantastic air journeys ever recorded. They flew from Los Angeles to New York City, where they created the airplane and boarded it on an ocean liner. They sailed to England, where their mission began. They flew to France, then Spain, and on to Africa. They crossed the Atlas Mountains and set out across the Sahara. They continued to Algeria, then Damascus, then Persia. In Persia, they met German aviator Elie Beinhorn, who was grounded due to mechanical problems. They gave the Crown Princess of Persia and the Crown Prince of Iraq rides in their airplane. In India, Richard made his second visit to the Taj Mahal, and in Nepal, as the flying carpet flew past Mount Everest, Richard stood up in the open cockpit and captured the first aerial photograph of the mountains. Richard and Moy became the first Americans to fly to the Philippines, where their journey ended. On April 27th, the plane was again loaded onto a ship to cross the ocean back to the United States. The excursion took 18 months to circumnavigate the globe, and by the time they finished, Richard had covered over 33,000 miles and visited 34 countries. The trip had cost him over $50,000 plus fuel. Richard began publishing books of his travels. He grew in fame, became friends with movie stars, writers, musicians, painters, and politicians. He was approached several times about film versions of his adventures and even appeared in one of the movies. But by 1938, Richard's fame was declining, so he came up with the bold idea to sail a Chinese junk from the Pacific Ocean, a feat he hoped would help renew the public's interest in him. He had been interested in sailing since childhood, though he had little practical navigation experience. On September 23, 1938, he set off on his new journey, first boarding the SS President Coolidge bound for Hong Kong. While there, Richard inspected a number of junks, finding most either too expensive or wholly unseaworthy. Instead, he decided to have a junk built. The sailing ship, named the Sea Dragon, took less than 6 weeks to complete. From the start, funding for the project was the main problem. Richard approached many sponsors, but all felt the risks of this expedition outweighed any rewards. Major funding came from his wealthy relatives. The construction was marked by engineering errors. A trial run in January 1939 revealed the ship's flaws. The Sea Dragon was top-heavy and rode precariously low. Nevertheless, Richard assured his subscribers that the dry deck indicated the ship's seaworthiness. To improve its stability, 10 tons of concrete was poured into its hull. There were other concerns. Many thought the heavy diesel engine was out of place aboard a vessel that traditionally sailed without mechanical assistance, and others noted that the masts and sails were far too heavy. Regardless of the concerns, Richard set sail in February. When asked if he harbored any doubts about the trip, he replied, "None at all." However, the first attempted voyage was forced to turn back after just a week at sea due to an illness among the crew. For medical reasons, one crew member stayed behind. He later offered an account of his experiences, saying the junk performed poorly in the rough seas. The Sea Dragon was hastily repaired before leaving port once again on March 4th. Calamity struck on March 23rd when the ship headed into a typhoon. The waters were rough and waves were estimated at 40 feet. The closest friendly ship to the junk was the liner President Coolidge, which was 400 miles away, itself battling huge seas. It was presumed the liner was on its way to meet with the troubled Sea Dragon. Among the radio messages the liner received from the junk's captain was an ironically cheerful one, saying, "Having a wonderful time, wish you were here instead of me." The next message was different. Southerly gale, heavy rain, high sea, barometer 29.46, true course 100, speed 5.5 knots. All well. When closer, we may avail ourselves of your direction finder. Regards, Welch. That was the last message heard from the junk. Richard had kept regular contact with radio stations and ocean liners. On March 27th, the Honolulu Star Bulletin noted that the Sea Dragon had not been heard from since March 24th. The next day, the Associated Press reported Richard could be in danger. At first, the Coast Guard delayed searching for Sea Dragon, believing Richard could have staged his disappearance as a publicity stunt. However, on April 10th, after Richard was overdue to call, the Coast Guard started their search. Several ships and planes searched the last reported position of Sea Dragon, scouring 152,000 square miles, but no trace of the junk or its crew were found. News of Richard's vanishing drew worldwide attention, being reported on in the United States and Europe. The circumstances, similar to those of Amelia Earhart's high-profile disappearance, contributed to intense public interest. Embassies in East Asia received updates about the missing junk. Shipping companies, private vessels, and various governments were asked to watch for survivors or debris. The Chinese government broadcasted appeals for information, and international newspapers published updates. Despite the efforts of several local government authorities, no evidence was found. In May, the search effort was ended, and by June, Richard's mother lost hope that he would be found alive. In subsequent months, officials filed the necessary paperwork to declare Richard legally dead. Richard became the most famous adventurer writer of his day. The articles about his adventures inspired others to seek adventure themselves. His fans flocked to hear him speak at public appearances, and teachers applauded his books for bringing life to historic events while introducing young readers to the benefits of reading. The Kansas City Star's editor's introduction of Richard offers a great summary of him. Richard Halliburton typifies the romantic spirit of youth, the desire to do and dare, to fulfill dreams regardless of consequences, attempting feats that older heads have declared impossible. Seemingly throwing caution to the winds, he has experienced enough thrills to last a normal man a lifetime. Richard had an appetite for risk. He planned expeditions which would best capture the public's imagination and push the limits of travel. But in 1939, his adventures came to an abrupt end after he did push the limits too far. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Richard's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media. And join me next week as I dive into another case.